Is any coming tonight, Don?
I don't know. I didn't even think to invite him.
Let me get this going.
I probably could have. I was going to say, you may have sent me the email.
So, 10 minutes to 2 or 3 minutes with those 1 to 2 minutes.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're good. You found it. So I'll set the timer for 3 minutes then. When I talking.
So, good evening. We'll have candidates come on stage, and we'll be starting very shortly.
And dance.
And dance. Oh, and dance. I didn't know there was an opening.
There's an opening.
That was not a mistake. It's okay.
That's
Water.
improvise. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like missing like.
If we don't have, is there a vending machine? There's a vending machine up by the Marlowe's
And
office.
do we want to take a break? Do we want to take a 5-minute break, maybe halfway through?
I don't mind just powering through, but it's still I'm fine.
I should have got water.
You want me to just go grab a couple from the vending machine?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then This is a game left versus how we play.
These.
Don't talk when it's not your turn.
If I'm in the phone, if you want, hold them the whole time you can, but you want to slow them down. So that's what I do.
We'll be all right. We were. We didn't get any fight. It was actually a week ago today. We were all behaved.
We all four. who you'd like to vote for and what policies you would like to support. So tonight is live. We want to welcome the people in the audience tonight, as well as the viewers who are viewing on Northwest Public Access through their YouTube feed. We have candidates from all the contested races in Franklin 3 and Franklin 8. We'll start with the candidates. They'll do a brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll go right to the questions. We realize in this political environment, that especially in the local area, there are some hot button issues that we want to address and get right into. I have 3 pages of questions to go through. I probably won't get through all of them, but we'll certainly work our way through a variety of topics and try to cover as much as we can. We've asked for a civil audience tonight, a respectful audience. We hope you can help us out with that. Again, we want to remember that we're an academic institution here, both for our students and what we do for our community. So respecting each other and having a good, healthy debate tonight is very healthy indeed. Before I finish up here, I just want to thank our candidates for being here tonight. Everyone jumped right on board, thought it was a good idea, and couldn't not do this without their agreeing to come and speak in front of you tonight. Also want to thank Dino Patsource. He's the Northwest Career and Technical Center Outreach Coordinator. He's doing a lot of the heavy lifting tonight with our live feed and helping with the setup. Doug Bell, Tech Coordinator here in the PAC. I want to thank my colleague and co-president of the association, Katie Campbell. She's a 30-year veteran of SATEC, and she'll be helping out tonight with the debate. And lastly, but not least, want to thank our media partner, Northwest Public Access TV. They are a fantastic organization, and they just jumped tonight to help us with the live stream, provide equipment, and so forth, resources. So again, thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for everyone at home who's watching. We'll get right into things and get the evening going. So to begin the debate for tonight, let's do candidate introductions. How about we just go right down the line? We'll start with Mike.
Well, hi. Thank you very much, Katie and Armand and everybody here for having us. I'm Representative Mike McCarthy, and I am the representative currently for the Franklin 3 District, which is the northern 2/3 of the city of St. Albans. I grew up in Franklin County from the time I was in 6th grade when my dad moved up. I hope this isn't a knock against me, but he got the job as the principal at Missisquoi Valley Union High School back in the mid-'90s, and that's what brought our family to Vermont when I was little. I went to MVU. I graduated from St. Michael's College with a degree in biochemistry and a minor in political science, and I've used the poli-sci minor way more than the biochem major. But after going to California for a few years, I came back in 2008, and I bought a little bakery and cafe with my mom and my brother, and we turned it into Cosmic Bakery and Cafe on Main Street. And I learned so much about the people in this community and the struggles and the joys of running a downtown small business. We sold that in 2014, and since then my day job has been working as a solar project consultant, helping schools and businesses and farms go solar and save money with renewable energy. I was first elected to the House in 2012, and I've served 2 terms on the City Council, starting in 2017 and just wrapped that up in 2023. And one of the reasons that I decided not to run for City Council again is that I had the opportunity to serve in House leadership as the Assistant Majority Leader for 2 years in the previous biennium. And for the last 2 years, I've chaired my committee, House Government Operations and Military Affairs, where I've gotten to work with the Department of Public Safety on modernizing law enforcement, training and recruitment. I've gotten to work with the Secretary of State on elections law and making sure that professional licensure works, and that our everything from mental health counselors to cosmetologists are safe for the public. Some of the things I'm the most proud of in the last few years that we've done is pass our historic child care legislation, Act 76, and what I think will be very relevant is that I played a big part in making sure that we preserved public pensions for teachers and state employees. And so last biennium, when we passed that landmark pensions bill, we saved the state of Vermont hundreds of millions of dollars and preserved our promise to public employees with pensions. I'm running for re-election because there's a lot of work that's yet to be done. I know we're going to talk a lot tonight about public safety and education, so I left that out of my opening statement. But I'm really looking forward to talking about the different visions that we have and trying to make sure that we have a Vermont with a government that works for everybody, not just the folks who already have wealth. So thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Zach?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for being here inside of our beautiful Performing Arts Center here at our local public high school. And thanks to everybody watching online with public TV. I'm Zach Scheffler. I'm running for state representative in Franklin County's 8th District, which includes parts of St. Albans Town and parts of St. Albans City. I'm a lifelong Vermonter. I was born and raised here in Franklin County. My family lives, works, and has their own businesses here in the county. And, Alice and I are really proud to call St. Albans our home. When I think about running this race and how I came to be on this stage, I think of my life in Franklin County and how far I've come. I've had a lot of lucky breaks and a lot of big opportunities in this county, and I've taken advantage of those things. And I want to do the work to help others take advantage of those same things, have that same luck, and have that same outcome. I work and have worked. Some of you may know me from my time at the public TV station, my time at the local newspaper, or at where I currently work as a community manager at Front Porch Forum. I am a former first responder and a volunteer, and I continue volunteer work as a board member of our municipal energy committee and as a board member of our local young professionals network here in Franklin County. Why am I running? We all want to ask the question of everybody on this stage. Why are we running? And why I'm running is for a couple different reasons. Number one, I want to be a force of unity and a legislator who brings neighbors together. And that's because in my life and in my work, I've seen the power of what can happen when neighbors come together and work to solve problems that, quite frankly, and especially today, are too big to fix on our own and by ourselves. The other reason I'm running is because I've personally seen what the costs of things like housing, healthcare, childcare, caregiving generally, school and work and education and transportation and things like home heating, what effects that has on people who are very close to me, my friends, my family, and my neighbors. I want to be a legislator who works to lower those costs. And why I feel that's important is because as a young Vermonter, I'm looking forward to living here for many years into the future. Another reason why I feel compelled to run, and one of the biggest reasons that I chose to run this year, was a very specific bit of change that I feel like I can bring to Franklin 8. I want to be a legislator who is responsive, who listens wholeheartedly to everybody in the district, and not just the voters who vote for me. I'm looking forward to being a legislator that calls you back, reads your emails and responds to them, and someone who can bring us all together over honest information that does something that I think is more important in this day and age than ever before, which is use honest information to navigate a very complicated world and make decisions that, good decisions that affect, ourselves and our families and our neighbors. That's what I'm looking forward to doing, and that's my pledge. There's a lot more about me, but if you want to learn more, you can go to my website, z4vt.com. That's the letter Z, the number 4, VT, as in Vermont.com. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. And I'm looking forward to a healthy debate.
Thank you, Zach. Joe.
Good evening. I'm Joe Luno. I am running for state representative in Franklin 3. I'm a product of St. Albans City School and Bellows Free Academy. And actually, I was speaking with Armand earlier and noticed my team Scholars Bowl state championship is still up on the wall. So hopefully another BFA team has been successful since 1992, but maybe this is not the case. With the exception of degree attained at Boston College, I am a lifelong product of Franklin County. I worked and have worked at a family business that has been part of the St. Albans community since the 1950s. And why am I running? I'm running because I think there is an imbalance in Montpelier. There is a supermajority, and I firmly believe that supermajorities, regardless of which party holds them, are bad for government and result in bad policy. And what we see going on right now is not an exception. Speaking with people throughout Franklin 3 and St. Albans in general, there are substantive affordability issues that are worse than they need to be as a result of decisions that have been made in Montpelier in the last couple of years. And frankly, people feel less safe in the community than I think they need to be. And the legislature in Montpelier, and regardless of who's making the votes, doesn't have a magic wand. But I think that it's incumbent upon those who do have that mandate to do what they can. And I don't think we're doing as much as we could be.
Thank you, Joe. Casey.
All right. Thank everyone for coming. Thank you for hosting this. When you first sent this over, I was really excited because we usually do one down at City School, and that's always fun. So it's really good to be back in BFA and being able to do this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Casey Toof. I represent St. Albans City and St. Albans Town. I live in the town right now, but I was born and raised in St. Albans City. My parents still live in the house I grew up in. I went to St. Albans City School. I attended BFA while I was here. I was captain of 3 sports teams. I wrote for the paper. I was pretty much involved a lot around here, and that's one of the things, the teachers and the coaches that I interacted with, they were kind of the people that were inspired me to give back when I got older. Now I'm coaching. I've been coaching sports, youth sports, since I was 18 years old. Now I have the privilege of being able to coach my sons in soccer, in baseball, whenever I can find the time. In the legislature, I've been there for 6 years. That's 3 terms. In that time, I've always been on the House Education Committee. I am currently the ranking member of the House Education Committee. I am the co-chair of the Vermont Future Caucus, which is it's a caucus of young legislators under 45 who work together across the aisle on solutions that affect younger Vermonters. And we actually won the Charisse Eatman Collective Impact Award last December. And so I was really proud that our caucus could do that. It's just based on the work that we've done in Vermont. And the national organization gave us that. I'm on the board at NCSS. I also was the town planning commission chair for 5 years. I'm no longer doing that. When my kids started getting involved in sports, it kind of took a lot of time away. My wife Haley is here. I should acknowledge that she came to see me tonight, so thank you for coming. Why am I running? I'm running because I don't like the direction that our state is going. I have 2 kids that are growing up here. They go to SATEC. They are in 4th and 2nd grade. I want them to be able to take advantage of all the things that St. Albans has to offer, because there's a lot of things that St. Albans has to offer. I took advantage of those. I want them to have more opportunities, but I also want them to be able to afford to grow up and live here when they graduate. And I want this to be a safe place for them when they do decide where they're going to live. I want them to be able to find a place to live, find a job, and be able to raise their family here. So thank you all for coming. I look forward to this tonight. This is not as easy as talking to people at the door or talking in front of 150 people on the House floor. This is a little more intimidating, but it's kind of fun and refreshing.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you for all the open remarks from our candidates. We'll jump right into it. We're going to talk about education first. Schools, financing, how to pay for schools, taxes. And their first question, maybe we'll start with you, Casey, because you were the last to go, so you should be the first. Maybe we'll start with our seated representatives first, and then we'll move along for everyone to have a chance to answer the question here. And then for rebuttals, 2 to 3 minutes on each question for candidates, and 1 to 2 minutes on rebuttals. And please direct to me if you want to jump in, and I can moderate through that. So the first question is, communities that form Maple Run Unified School District saw significant property tax rate increases, with St. Albans Town seeing 13.1%, St. Albans City 15.5%, and Fairfield at 22%. What's the main element driving these tax rates, and was this preventable?
Okay, that's a pretty good question to start us off with. I believe that this was preventable. We got the December 1st tax letter. The commissioner is required by statute to send us a letter every year, and they warned that it was going to be 20% was the statewide average. It ended up being 13.8%. But how did we get there? A few years ago, we passed Act 127 that changed the way we weight students, and a lot of we saw districts change their taxing capacity. And this is kind of getting into the weeds of how the financing works, but basically, some schools had a lower tax capacity but still spent over their tax capacity, while others gained tax capacity. We saw $243 million in new spending, which was up significantly from year over year. And the state of Vermont has a system that I believe incentivizes school districts to spend more. And what I mean by that is that they're incentivized if we don't spend what we can spend, we're still going to pick up the bill for someone else. So it does work out sometimes when we want to build projects or we want to have things happen for us. But it's not always equitable in my mind, because you look at Milton, they dropped $800,000 in their budget. They had to keep going back to the drawing board and have to read. We were lucky in St. Albans we passed the budget, and our students are going to be able to benefit from any kind of money that they had. But in Milton and in other areas, they had to cut back, and those students aren't getting the same amount of money from the state, which you could probably interpret it to be they're not getting the same advantages as other students. So if we really want an equitable system, we need to figure out how much does it cost to educate one student, how much does it cost for schools, and finding those equities and finding those balance in there. So there's talks about how can we save money. And consolidation comes to mind. Well, they're only talking about consolidating smaller schools. We're not looking at bigger schools like in the Chittenden County area where they're seeing such a drop in student population where they're sharing school teams. Where can we find these savings within those? And you're going to have to let me know if I ramble on too much if I go past my 2 minutes. But there wasn't an appetite this year to change that. We raised new taxes to get from 20% down to 13.8%. But there was no negotiating to make it any lower. Next year, we're looking at even higher possibility of higher taxes, and that's not fair for our schools because it puts taxpayers against schools. It puts people upset that it costs so much. And I bet if you went and surveyed the teachers around Maple Run, I don't know if anyone got a 13.1%, a 15.5%, or a 22% increase in their pay. So I think that we really need to know where we're spending our money, find out how this is going to affect the students. What is the best thing for our students is the real question. So if I rambled on, I apologize.
Just in time. Thank you very much. Let's move to Mike. You're seated as a representative. We'll do this question, and then we'll try to do candidate responses from the opposing candidate. But we'll start with you, Mike, because you're seated in the House.
Thanks, Armand. So our system since 1997, so the challenges that we have had with education finance go back to the time that I was in public school. And we went to a statewide finance system, but with local budget decisions driving which buildings we're in, what class sizes we want, which programs we're going to offer. And I think that in large part that's been good for most Vermont schools. I think that in the vast majority of Vermont communities, the highest value that we have is making sure that every single student gets a good education and has access to a variety of programs and is prepared to go to high school and go to college or go to a tech center, has access to a tech center, has access to athletics. But the cost of providing public education in what we have, the system that we have right now with 119 districts, and the changing demographics that we have in the state is rising a lot faster than I think most Vermonters can afford. And it was a lot of work to get down from somewhere in the 20% averages down into the teens. We did ask with H850, a bill that I co-wrote, a bunch of districts who were overspending to go back and redo their budgets after they'd already been warned. And that $243 million figure that Casey talked about was lowered by tens of millions of dollars because we asked those schools to go back. And that was an extreme hardship for some of those districts. But most of the districts didn't do that. Most districts, including ours, the school boards did their work, they met, and they said, these are the budgets that we need in order to fund the behavioral and mental health staff that we added after the pandemic, now that federal funding's gone, a 16% increase in healthcare that no board had a control over. And our voters, by a narrow margin, but our voters here in Maple Run supported a pretty significant increase in our school budget. And I felt it was my duty to make sure that we passed that with the lowest tax increase that we could get over the line, but it was still significant and unsustainable. And that's why H887, the yield bill, which has been much talked about, I'm sure we'll talk about it more tonight, but it contained provisions not just to set the funding for this year, this school year that we're in right now, but to look to the future and say we're going to set up a commission on the future of public education. We're going to restore excess spending caps and go to more of a foundation formula where school districts that spend more are going to have to pay more locally to tie that tax rate back into your local spending. And it looks to a future and says we are going to have to curb these increases. But at the end of the day, it's the job of the legislature to pay the bill that is left when all of those 119 school districts pass their budgets. And it was really very hard to do that this year. The one other thing that we did to make sure that we tried to do this more fairly is that we expanded the property tax credit, and we can talk more about how that helps lower income Vermonters.
Thank you. Joe, do you want me to restate the question?
Certainly, if you may.
So with the tax increases with the numbers, and then the question was, what is the main element or elements driving these tax increases, and was this preventable?
Well, I think that's a two-part answer. So regarding what occurred earlier this year, Governor Scott proposed solutions for this year, had they, on an a la carte basis, had they been taken wholesale, would have resulted in a statewide increase of somewhere in the vicinity of 5%. That involved items such as, but not including, savings that were derived by revotes on school budgets before the yield bill was even voted on, reserve funds. There was conversation with the Treasurer's Office. This was in no way going to affect the state's credit rating. These recommendations did not involve borrowing money against future tax years. And not only were none of these recommendations supported by the supermajority currently in Montpelier, none of them were. And so we're back to where we were with a, more or less 14% increase on a statewide basis and 15.5% here in Franklin 3 this year alone. But that only speaks to this year. The other issue is there's a systematic disconnect whereby what voters vote on in their school budget doesn't really jive. They want to support their school budgets, but they don't know how that equates to what their property tax increases are going to be. And I think we need to work toward whereby there's a reasonable cap with appropriate modifiers that should be spent within a district. And if there are monies within a district that are spent beyond that, that those financial burdens need to be taken up by the district and not by Vermonters as a whole. And there's a flip side to that. So you talk about these wealthy towns that paid more. Well, you have the district that encompasses Swanton, Highgate, and Franklin they had to cut a much-needed parking lot out. And if you've been to the MVU campus, like, you can't drive more than 10 miles an hour, and if you do, you're going to puncture a tire or break an axle. And so those voters and those towns and those students went without $3 or $4 million from the original budget, but those savings don't stay in that district. They are spread throughout the whole state, and it just creates a scenario, and Casey alluded to it earlier, where there's really no relation between what you vote for and what your tax rate is. And that's a problem, and it needs to change.
Thank you. Zach.
A lot's been said at both tables, and I just want to start saying that public education is incredibly valuable, and we need to support it. And it's something that not only provides a future for our kids, but it enriches their lives and prepares them to give back in a big way here in our communities. A lot's been said. I'm grateful that the property tax credit was expanded. And one thing that I was surprised by at the doors was folks not necessarily knowing about it, and how important that honest information about what tools people had available to them, how important that was, because it impacted their bottom line, right? So I'm glad the property tax credit was expanded. We think about, the main element and what drove the cost. I want to zero in on something specifically, which is healthcare costs for teachers and for staff in these schools. And as a potential future legislator, if I'm elected, I'm really looking forward to doing the work to move forward on things like how we negotiate healthcare in the state, hospital costs, prescription drug costs, and the cost savings that those would provide us in drawing down those school budgets. And that ties back in a way in that, was this preventable? I think that working on healthcare reform going years back, and Vermont's attempted before, the work to do that is big, it's long, it's complicated. But you talk about these core issues that are hooked into and connected to so many things. I want to zero in right on healthcare and say that healthcare and housing, but healthcare specifically, was, if we had managed that issue as a state beforehand, it could have really done a lot to draw down those costs.
Thank you. Would anyone like to rebut, as far as offer rebuttal for 1 minute? Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that most of the things that were mentioned in the governor's plan, the governor came in January to the legislature, so we knew there were going to be really big budget increases, and said, hey, I've said things in the past, target class sizes, but he never put a plan on the table. There was never a group of legislators allies with the governor, and there are plenty of those on both the Democrat and the House Republican caucuses, to say this is exactly what we're going to tell districts to do to draw down these funds. And the governor left it to us to figure that out, and that's part of why across parties, people don't want to go to their schools and say, hey, I know you need this thing, but we're not going to support it in the legislature. And I think that if you read Vermont Digger or any of the articles about what happened by the time we got to April and the governor finally did send his tax commissioner into the Ways and Means Committee with a plan, it was to say, hey, we're going to basically use money from the next tax year, this tax year, and dig a hole even deeper for the future, so there are going to be bigger increases next time. And that, the treasurer and the Ways and Means Committee were not going to think was fiscally responsible.
Thank you. Casey?
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple things here that I forgot to mention, that we spend $2.4 billion to educate 80,000 students in the state of Vermont. That's not sustainable, and that's not, eventually we're going to run out of money if we keep going in that direction. This is the first time that I've ever heard of where our education spending is more than our general fund. The ed fund is larger than the general fund, which is concerning to me, because within the general fund you have the Agency of Human Services that cover about 200,000 Vermonters, whereas the education fund only covers about 80,000 students. So that we really need to hone in on this, because I think what you could see is closing schools or not being able to fund schools in the future if we see these taxes increase. And we do need a robust school system. My kids, I'm a product of public school. My kids are going to be a product of public school. I want this to succeed. I want them to, my colors on my signs are green and gold because of BFA, and I want them to go to BFA. I want this to succeed.
Thank you. Joe, Zach, good.
I thought I had a rebuttal already. There's a rebuttal to a rebuttal?
No, you answered the question, but I'm going to ask you the next question. So
Okay.
You ready to go? So, Joe, I want to pick up on some of the comments you made about perhaps understanding the tax system and how we fund schools. And I have several questions, and everyone's sort of answered these questions, but I want to put the questions out formally. So I'll start with you, Joe, but this is for everyone, and we'll end up with Zach next here. Is the current education funding formula too complicated for the average Vermont taxpayer to understand due to Act 60, which was 1997, then the subsequent education reforms such as Act 68, 2003? Do Vermonters fully understand how it all works with CLAs, equalized pupil spending, homestead versus non-homestead tax rates, income sensitivity, the new tax credit, education fund? So the question is, do they understand it, and how would you simplify it? How would you see a new system? How would it be more simple? And you talked a little about caps, so I'd like to have you explain, if you have an answer.
Well, to drill down on your question a little bit, not only do I think it's too complicated for the average Vermonter to understand, I know that, I think it's too complicated for the average legislator to understand. But going back to how it works, there's a the whole system was meant to make education more equitable for students within towns with greater or less economic opportunity. But the best laid plans just don't work in that regard sometimes. And so I think what we've created is a race to the affordability bottom, whereby, again, voters don't understand how their vote works with the overall state tax rate, and frankly, there's no way they could be unless they knew how the outcomes of all the other school budgets were going to be on town meeting day. And so if there were some sort of reasonable per capita spending per student, and that's something that would certainly have to be discussed and agreed upon in Montpelier, with excess spending relegated within the responsibility of that district, I think that would go a long way. Now, it would be dishonest for me to say how you do that. I'm an automotive service manager, so if a group of educators came in, given the instructions, you need to cut Joe's department by 10% and provide the same services, and they didn't get any input from automotive people, you're probably going to get some pretty awful recommendations. So I would strongly recommend that you speak with constituents within that community to get recommendations. And I have ad hoc a little bit, and you'll hear some from them. But to say, if elected, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, or the school in Franklin is too small, well, we'll pick on the school in Franklin. They might have a perfectly good plan. They're like, hey, if you give us that many resources per child, we're going to be just fine. And so I think there can be an element of local control while at the same time creating a more efficient product on a statewide basis for Vermonters.
Thank you. Zach.
Yeah, education is complex. I think there are so many elements. Students have so many needs. There's so many services. There's so many offerings that are at our public schools that there is some complexity. And complexity does arise because of the needs and differences between one district and another. That doesn't mean we can't make things more simple or approachable or be honest about information and educate our constituents. I'm excited to do that, and I'm curious to learn more about our education funding system and the various plans put forward. There's talk of more of an income-based model for funding public schools. I'm interested in that, and especially if it protects our middle class here in Vermont. And thinking about some of that complexity again, you have, I think about my kindergarten teacher who's now the superintendent in the Richford, Enosburg Supervisory Union, and the immense amount of needs that her and her students in the district have. my friend, I have a friend who works at the Richford High School, and others who see the vast amount of needs that students there have. So talk of complexity, is it too complex? I think it's the responsibility of our legislators to be curious and be willing to educate their constituents honestly about that complexity, work with them on how to better understand this. And I'm also interested and curious to learn about alternative models, things that are more income-based, maybe things that bring more sensitivity or add some funding mechanisms based on, how or how many homes or how much income one does make. I think it's important to protect our middle class, though, at the core of it, because our middle class needs to be protected in Vermont. And I think that even if the solution to doing that is complex, I think it's worth doing.
Thank you. We'll go with Mike and then Casey.
Can you just remind me exactly what you asked? Because listening to responses, I want to make sure I'm actually responding to your
I
question.
asked, the question, essential question was, do Vermont taxpayers fully understand how the system works with all the various elements, such as CLAs, equalized pupil spending, homestead versus non-homestead taxes, the education fund, and what would you do, or what changes could be made?
Yeah, so the simple answer is no. Most Vermont voters could not explain to you all of the intricacies of our education finance system. And that's all been in an attempt over 3 decades to make it increasingly fair. And every time you tweak it to try to make it a little more fair from town to town and school to school, it gets more and more complicated. If you like what Joe just said about excess spending thresholds and tying the local tax rate to local excess spending, that's exactly what we did for the next years moving forward when we passed the yield bill this year. It's exactly what we did. We implemented that, but we couldn't do it for the tax year we're in. And that's been one of the biggest problems. The other challenge we have in particular in our communities here, and especially in the city, is the common level of appraisal, which is, this blunt force instrument that the tax department has to use to make it so that a house in Fairfield and a house in St. Albans might be assessed at a different value but have a similar value out there on the market get taxed in a similar way. And it is the way that it works when you have an old assessment like we do and your property values are only 64% of what they should be according to the formula, means that everybody gets whacked in a way that's not really fair from property owner to property owner within that city. We have set with a bill that we passed last biennium moving towards statewide assessment policy that's going to be phased in over the next 3 to 5 years that is going to fix that problem whether we solve the spending problems or not. But I have respect enough for voters to know that when the tax letter came out and there was a ton of news coverage back in December and January and February that if we raise school budgets, taxes were going to go up a lot. Voters knew that. And voters in Maple Run still supported a big increase in our school budget. And I have trouble understanding anybody who says, you know what, we should just go to Montpelier and not fund the school budgets that pass. We need to do structural things, and we have started that process to get spending under control. And I could go on and on about the different things that we can do to actually lower costs without hurting kids. But I have a hard time with the rhetoric about capping taxes when I also hear that you don't know exactly what you would do in order to cut the spending.
Thank you. Casey.
Yeah, so the question is, current funding formula too complicated to understand? Yes. I don't think a lot of people really understand how it works. I've been on House Education for 6 years. Every year in January we spend most of the time just learning about the formula and how it works. And I don't know enough about it to be able to explain it completely to someone just on the street. But with that said, there are some changes we can do. We can make it simpler. We can look at caps that have been caps on spending. I alluded to it earlier. How much does it cost to educate one student? We could really figure this out. We also worked really hard in my committee to implement this task force that is going to look at the future of education. This is long overdue. We need to look at what the 21st century student and what the 21st century classroom looks like. But the problem with that is that might not be done for 3 years, and who knows how long that's going to take to implement it. We need changes now that's going to be able to save us in the future, because I believe we've already heard from the governor that if there's no new spending next year, and we just go with what we have now, we're already at about a 7% increase across the board. So any new spending is going to drive up those costs even more, which will make more people upset. We owe it to the taxpayers, and we owe it to our children to come up with the solutions to figure out how to change this. And we have some solutions. We need to look at human services. How do those affect our schools? Schools are a lot different than when I was in school 20 years ago. We need to look at, like I said, caps. There are so many things to look at. I don't think any of us are going to have the solution up here in 2 minutes to explain it, but there are solutions out there. We need to work together to get to them, but we do need to act with some kind of sense of urgency because, like I said, we owe it to our taxpayers to give them the relief, and we can't just keep going this way.
Thank you. Time for rebuttals here. Joe, do you want to jump in on something? Or?
Certainly. So going back to what happened this year and what's going on in the future, again, there was an opportunity without touching any of the spending that was approved within local budgets on town meeting day or subsequently in ensuing votes to get the statewide increase down to about 5%. But the supermajority of Montpelier voted to forego that and go ahead with the increase that we've seen. And that is just not something that's sustainable for Vermonters. I've spoken with people older folks particularly, who live in homes with no mortgages that don't know how they're going to stay in them. People whose rents are being raised exorbitantly with a lot of inflationary power resulting from these school budget increases. And certainly for this year, without getting into ensuing years, it was completely unnecessary, didn't need to happen, wouldn't have had a negative impact on ensuing tax years or school funding, but happened anyway. And I don't understand it.
Thank you. Zach, then Mike.
I just want to reiterate that whatever the school funding plan is moving forward, having a legislator who is going to get back to you if you are someone who doesn't understand the system. You need to be a legislator who can be responsive, call back, write back, and explain things, regardless of how complicated it is. That's your responsibility, in my mind, as a legislator, is to educate your constituents and educate your voters and have an open ear and an open mind to hear them out.
Mike.
The governor did not come to the legislature with a plan that would have actually lowered property taxes down to 5%. The governor did put some ideas on the table, but they weren't fleshed out. And I think part of the reason they weren't is because he hasn't appropriately staffed or led or provided a vision for the Agency of Education. The governor's largely just left this to school boards and the legislature to figure out on our own. And when the Ways and Means Committee and the Education Committee looked at the ideas that he had, many of them weren't implementable this year. The treasurer sat in House Ways and Means and listened to the proposal to, switch which revenues, which years we were going to book revenue and borrow against next year in order to fund this year's tax bill or this year's budget bills. And I just agree with Mike Pichak, who I think, he was part of the Scott administration at one point, that was fiscally irresponsible. So I just really disagree with, and I was down there, with what happened this year.
Anyone else want to jump in? Okay, I'd like to move the conversation forward. We've talked a lot about education, but I still want to hit some points on that. But Casey, I want to jump in on something you said, because you mentioned Agency of Human Services, and I have a question about this. Now, some of the questions we have formulated tonight come from members. I put a survey out asking them if you had questions we can forward to candidates tonight, and this is a question from one of our members. I am wondering what your thoughts are when working on next year's state budget, specifically around mental health needs of our youth. Are you open to having conversations about sharing money from the Agency of Human Services budget to fund more mental health services in our schools? Casey, why don't you start?
Well, I think right now we're already seeing mental health services within our schools, and that's part of the cost, right, that the schools are having to pay. Like I said, things are different than when I was in school. There's a lot more mental health services needed. I know that we see a problem in St. Albans with unhoused population, substance abuse. This kind of stuff trickles down to our youth who see this and have to deal with this, and they come to school with different kind of things that I never had to grow up with, and I've never had experience. So yeah, I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that they look at is how does human services play into our education funding. The only thing that the way the legislature works is like the ed fund is really sacred. Like let's not do anything to mess up the ed fund. We need to know how much money is going to fund schools. So there needs to be some work between human services, the Department of Education, and figure out how we spend this and how it affects property tax dollars. And that's going to be something that's going to have to be looked at. I think the task force is looking at that as part of their future of education. But it's a really big issue, and we're seeing it in our society. And it isn't good. You know, it doesn't reflect well on the schools because the schools are like, well, a lot of this cost is coming from human services and needs. But we just need to figure out how to make that look so we can spend the money on education properly and also get people the right services they need.
I'll open it up to anyone who wants to jump in what order you want to go. Someone wants, Joe, you want to go next on the question?
I can, but I'm sorry. My apologies. But given that we're clearly partisan split, I think it would be appropriate that we alternated.
That's fine. Let's go with Mike.
So I am particularly biased around mental health services. I forgot in my intro to mention that my wife, Stephanie, is a therapist and a licensed clinical social worker and has worked in the community in mental health for about a decade now. We have a lot of challenges with the workforce. And that's part of why I'm proud that we've done things like interstate licensure compacts to try to make it easier for people to get access. And telehealth has really been a great way that we've been able to provide more mental health services for people who need it. We are investing in crisis beds, and I think the attitude in the legislature the pendulum has swung back away from absolutely everything being in the community because we realize too many crisis and acute mental health issues were resulting in people having unsafe long stays in emergency rooms. And so we are investing in more beds there. A coalition of people I really respect from, Representative McGuire, who's a Rutland County legislator, all the way through like Mark Redmond from Spectrum, who's doing great work with youth in our community, came together and wrote a letter that just came out last week that said, listen, if somebody's struggling with substance use, it costs $95,000 a year to incarcerate them. It would be way less if we invested in longer inpatient treatment, so detox, inpatient that's proven and clinically proven to work, and then recovery residences after so that people have a safe, supported, sober living opportunity so that they can actually get their lives back together and not just cycle through the way things are now for so many of the people that we're seeing. And we're going to talk about public safety, but mental health is a lot of what's driving that if you include substance use in our vision of what we need to do in order to tackle mental health. 10 years ago, we were having some really huge issues in this community that were mostly driven by opiate in pill form and heroin. The drugs that are out on the street now, like fentanyl, the tools that we set up, the hub and spoke model, the use of medically assisted therapies, don't work the same way. They're not nearly as effective or appropriate for the particular situation we have now. And I think a theme that any legislator is going to find is there aren't quick fixes, because even when you realize that there's something we could invest in or something we should invest in differently or change, the absolute earliest you're usually going to be able to get that in is the following July 1st in the legislative process. And we're tackling a lot of these issues already or laying the foundation to, but there's more work to be done.
Joe.
Yeah, so I'll take to account both the previous speakers, Mike and Casey. So, and some great information from both of those guys, but neither one answered the question. The question was, should resources from the Department of Mental Health be reallocated to the education fund? And my answer to that would be no, because there isn't enough money for mental health services as it is for what they're needed. Now, that doesn't mean that there don't need to be other resources allocated within the education fund for mental health services. But one of the places I think we're really failing Vermonters is that we're not focusing enough on rehabilitation and trying to just make folks better for themselves and for our society who are suffering from addiction and from mental health issues. So no, I don't think that we can, siphon more resources from an already underfunded Department of Mental Health.
We've been talking a lot about reacting to, our kids' mental health in school, in the community. And I think that part of this conversation, and a conversation that I'm really interested in having, is about prevention and the cost savings that come along with that. In my line of work, we examine studies and talk about the effects of social media and the mental health effects of social media, particularly those that how they affect our kids, right? And a number of schools in Vermont are having a conversation about, do we want to have social media, which has been shown to degrade our students' mental health and distract from their ability to learn, and really take away from their ability to live a healthy life in and outside the school. They're having conversations based on national research about having phones in schools. And so thinking about, from a prevention standpoint, and how to improve our students' mental health in schools to save money, I think that each of these communities, and this community here, would benefit from a conversation about having social media in schools, having phones in schools, and the mental health benefits that come along with that, and with improved mental health of the student population, the lowered costs in treating, mental health issues.
Does anyone want to jump in on the question for rebuttal? Okay. Let's move on. I want to move to community safety. And St. Albans has recently, in the past year, has had some issues with homelessness or people being unhoused. What do the candidates propose to address issues of homelessness in St. Albans? And I'll start with Zach.
I live in St. Albans, and in a part of St. Albans where you see this, and they're your neighbors, and I think about just that word, unhoused, and how many people, many different groups of people are included in that one simple word, right? Talking with a neighbor of mine at the doors, he spoke about a relative of his brother who has a good job at Global Foundries, and yet because of the lack of housing and lack of affordable housing, he's couch surfing. He's homeless. I think about all the different groups of people who maybe have employment and are tenting out so that they can get to their place of employment. Folks who can't take showers every day to go and interview and hold a stable job. And so when it comes down to what to do about homelessness and our unhoused folks, whatever we do needs to take into account the many different groups of people that are affected by the lack of housing in Vermont. they're working people, they're families, they're people with disabilities, they're folks who do have substance use problems, do have mental health issues. All these issues as well intersect in a whole bunch of different ways. And I think it just turns to housing, whether it's temporary or permanent, the stability that having a home brings enables you to live a better life. And I think about neighbors who I have seen tenting out, who have gotten on wait lists, done the hard work to move up on those wait lists and have found housing, and the difference that that has made in their life is immense. So whether it's a temporary shelter system or doing the hard work to build homes in our communities so that the people working at Global Foundries and Barry Callebaut, folks who need those mental health supports and those wraparound services, I'm just excited to take part in housing more Vermonters. And again, getting back to these core issues, healthcare and housing, this issue is at the center of so many other community safety and public safety questions and situations that we have. But just in sum, we need to talk more about housing, and we need to be serious about taking serious action as quickly as we can on temporary or permanent housing.
Yeah, when you asked the question, the only thing I wrote down was housing. This is the number one thing that was on everyone's plate, I believe, in 2022 when we were going door to door. Was housing was a big issue. I think affordability and public safety has taken over since then. But when we look at housing, housing fixes a lot of our problems in the state. It helps build our workforce. It gives people a place to live. I hear of young professionals who are basically homeless because they're staying at home, living with mom and dad longer, can't find a place that's affordable, can't find a place, and they're leaving. They're going to move out. They're going to find housing in other states. Housing fixes our property tax issue. It's going, the larger our grand list, the lower the property taxes become. And then lastly, we're talking about homelessness. Build more housing, you're going to be able to house more people, more housing available. And that's why I supported the governor's veto of the so-called housing bill last year, which was really just an Act 250 bill that really limited to growth within the city centers. And it didn't allow for more housing to be built outside of places like St. Albans and Burlington and Bennington and Brattleboro. And so we're limiting housing within the rest of the state. That puts more burden on St. Albans, because if we're there, the city of St. Albans is building housing right now. And I think that's great to see, but we need more housing that's going to push people. Some people need single-family homes, people need duplexes, people need apartments. There's a lot of things we can do if we build more housing, and I think that helps the homeless and the unhoused population in St. Albans. And that's kind of one of the biggest things we were fighting about last year. Was a tripartisan bill that actually made a lot of people upset last year because so many people had signed onto it, but it didn't go through the Housing Committee. It went through the Environment and Energy Committee, and it seemed like it made more regulation on our rural towns. It didn't improve. Most of it's going to be around our city centers, which is great, which helps St. Albans City out a lot. But we need to build more housing. We need to get serious about it, because I believe the Vermont Chamber of Commerce said we need about 85,000 homes to get where we need to be, and that's a lot of houses to be built, and that's a lot. We don't have the workforce to build that. We don't have we just don't have that capability to do it. So we need to be ready as a state to build more housing.
Let's start with
So I think the question was, what are we actually going to do about housing and homelessness? All right. So we're already doing a bunch of things. I'll touch on some of those, and then talk about how that leads into the things we need to do next. So some things that we've already done. We secured money, and I was a big champion of this during the budget process, for youth transition housing and shelter that Spectrum is already working on here. We've secured the seed money for that, and they've built on that with charitable contributions to add that for youth housing here. We are actively involved using the Vermont Housing Conservation Board and other funding sources in the housing that you're seeing go up in Vermont right now, from Reed Commons, which is the 55 and up housing that's going up in the Old Fonda right now, to the Lake and Maple apartments. And then there are programs like VHIP, and I noticed one person who's in the audience that used a VHIP grant to add an apartment to an existing multi-unit, right? That's added one more unit here that was way more affordable than building up a whole new building. So VHIP's great, and I think we've been collaborating on that. So there are all those things that we have already been putting in motion to try to deal with housing and homelessness. From a values perspective, I'm a person who thinks that we have a responsibility to make sure that everybody has shelter. It is way cheaper to make sure that everybody has at least some temporary shelter, and it's just in a state, in a community, in a country that has the resources we have. The fact that we have so many people camping out in tents, cold and unsafe, is a moral, and it's a failure. And I play a part of it. Everybody does. Representative Tu talked about H687, and he said some of the things he doesn't like about it. What I do like about it is that it gets rid of Act 250 jurisdiction in places like the city of St. Albans. And it does get rid of some of the local control because it relaxes local zoning regulations and allows for some more density. But for places like the city of St. Albans, for Burlington, the places we all agree we want to see more development, that have water and wastewater, that aren't going to have a negative impact on the beautiful scenery that we all love about Vermont. We've extremely lifted regulation by passing that bill. And I think that the support that it had from the development community and from people who are interested in protecting the environment was the reason that it was a tripartisan bill and so many people supported it. And I have trouble imagining why anybody from a place like the city of St. Albans would have been against H687. That doesn't make sense to me, because that will help. The other thing we need to do moving forward that I'm hearing when I listen to people in our community that are working with unhoused Vermonters, especially people like Ben Kaufman at Tim's House and the great people at CVOEO, is that we need low barrier emergency shelter. And I know there's a lot of community angst about that, but I want to talk about that more.
Joe.
So, regarding the unhoused community, I think a good departure point should be that we shouldn't increase the cost of housing 5 or 6 times the rate of inflation, which is exactly what happened in Montpelier this year vis-a-vis the property tax increase and the property transfer increase, whereby it costs more for a Vermonter to buy a business or buy a home. So logically, if housing costs more, that's going to make housing less accessible for more people. That said, I think there's a general concurrence that you can't leave people unhoused if they want to be housed. So we need to look at what is compassionate and fair and sustainable. And that may mean congregate housing. I'm not sure what that would look like precisely, but it needs to mean that somebody has a roof over their head if they want it, that they have access to utilities and running water in a kitchen. And I think there are ways to do that maybe we haven't comprehensively imagined as well as we could have. Certainly the way we're delivering that now isn't getting us where I need to be, and that's represented by the unhoused people we see within our communities. The conservation bill that was passed this year in the clothing of permit reform doesn't get us where we need to be as Vermonters. As Mike alluded to, it largely eviscerates local zoning. So a place like St. Albans City that's already building all kinds of units is told what it needs to do in other parts of its community by the state. I don't think that's right. And on the other side of that, if you get outside of communities without municipal sewer and water, the Act 250 regulations actually become more onerous, whereby increasingly only folks in the upper income strata, upper wealth strata, are going to be able to live outside of our downtowns and villages. And I don't think that really resonates with the values of Vermonters in general, and it certainly doesn't resonate with the need for housing in this state.
Would anyone like to offer any other comments and rebuttals for what other people said? We're good to move on? I'll speak loud. I want to keep on the subject of affordability. Regarding the Clean Heat Standard bill, where are we at with this proposed legislation? What are the pros and cons? And do the short-term costs outweigh the long-term costs and concerns? So it's a three-part question. I'm more than happy to repeat it. And that will start with Mike.
So I'll start with where we are right now. The Public Utility Commission was asked to evaluate if we are going to meet our carbon reduction goals and lower costs for Vermonters on how they heat and cool their buildings and homes. What would it take in terms of all of the incentives, help with efficiency and weatherization, help converting to heat pumps and more efficient furnaces, a whole bunch of different ways that we can get lower carbon, lower cost heating into Vermont homes and buildings. And the number that they came up with to reach our goals is in the billions. And it's in the billions because we spend $1.3 billion a year heating homes and buildings in Vermont. So it's going to be a big number. We don't have to do absolutely everything that was in the clean heat analysis that was done by the Public Utility Commission in order to invest more in weatherization and start saving Vermonters money. And I think what we're going to end up doing is choosing the things that are the lowest cost but have the biggest impact on saving people money and lowering the amount of fuel they have to burn. And that's not just for environmental reasons. I mean, number two heating oil in 1 year, 2 years ago, jumped from about $3 a gallon to over $5 a gallon. That's unaffordable. That's unsustainable. Vermonters can't handle that kind of increase on something they absolutely need to fuel their homes. That's what's driving us to look at how we actually help Vermonters afford the heat that they need by reducing the amount that they need to burn and fuel and getting their homes and buildings to be more efficient. Getting there is going to be hard. We're not going to be able to do everything that we want. And I think whatever clean heat bill we do is not going to be able to have the price tag because the transition of making it affordable is going to have to be there. But I want to point out to folks that most of us here in the city, we're on natural gas, where we already pay an efficiency fee. And we're lucky that the Public Utility Commission regulates the price of that fuel that we use to heat most of our homes. Folks who are on kerosene, propane, and number two heating oil, they don't have the benefit of a regulated market. They're going to pay what their fuel dealer charges them. And helping Vermonters spend less on that is a huge goal that I have for the long term, but I'm certainly not going to support something that has a huge increase in people's year-over-year costs. But when we're looking at going from $3 to over $5 year over year, I think adding a little bit of an efficiency charge in order to reinvest in people getting access to lower cost efficient furnaces and weatherization, that's just smart. That is something that we can do and create market-based solutions for this.
So, I mean, we talk about the clean heat standard, which Mike now is proposing as a consumer protection bill. That was never part of the discussion in Montpelier. And frankly, parts of it just don't make sense to me. So natural gas is accepted from any proposed surcharge or tax, but propane, which is also compressed gas, is a problem. I don't argue, and I think most reasonable people would not argue, that global warming is a real thing and that we should do what is reasonable vis-a-vis weatherization, which is something the state of Vermont and Vermonters have invested in for a long time, or more efficient heating appliances in order to not use resources inefficiently. But for Vermont to think that it's going to solve a global issue with exorbitant taxes, primarily on Vermonters, once again, outside of traditional downtowns, which is where you don't have access to natural gas, is dishonest. It's like there's an effort just to get most of the people into these downtowns and to get the folks that can afford it to be outside the downtowns. But to think that Vermont is going to correct this climate issue would be analogous to Vermont starting its own space program because it didn't like what was going on in Texas.
Zach.
This is a really exciting topic. Again, as it's been to reiterate, the choice between clean fuels and saving money is a false choice. You can do both. Thinking about this conversation and hearing words like propane, I think of all the wood that I had to split as a young kid to supplement my parents' propane heating costs. It was a lot. And being on our municipal energy committee, it was also very exciting to attend a forum by people like VGS, but also Green Mountain Power and Efficiency Vermont, and to speak about all the ways that all sorts of different Vermonters can save money on weatherizing their homes, buttoning up their homes. It's a lot of information. There's a lot out there. Again, I just want to reiterate that talk about things like the clean heat standard need to be discussed honestly and without talking points, and really need to dig into the options that are available to Vermonters. Mike mentioned the fact that the research has been done, numbers are in, and it's up to the legislature moving forward to chart a path forward and build a plan on how we can do this and make it make sense for Vermonters. And thinking about all the different groups of people in Vermont and in our community that'll be served by this plan, it has to include people like our fuel dealers, right? This is an industry that we have here in, well, our district in Franklin 8, and they need to be part of this conversation as well, specifically with all of this clean energy technology coming online, becoming cheaper, becoming more available to people, to becoming more available to more Vermonters here in St. Albans. We need to be able to make sure that those jobs, that those companies are able to service these new energy options. People want freedom of choice to heat their homes, and if folks can go to their fuel dealer and do what many are doing right now and install alternative energies, that's business going to local companies and local workers. So there are a lot of groups that are affected by this discussion, and I think if you make a plan that accommodates those different groups, that's possible. And I'm excited to be a part of that, just because it's a really exciting part of our path forward here in Vermont.
Casey.
Well, first, if they start a space program in St. Albans, I hope I'm on that planning, Joe. Clean heat standard is, I believe, was a disaster when it came through the State House. When we didn't know what it was going to cost, but we wanted to pass it. Now we're finding out it's going to be about a $10 billion cost to Vermonters. $10 billion, that's with a B, and we're hearing some estimates of up to $7 a gallon for heating fuel. Vermonters can't afford that. I couldn't afford that. Luckily, we are on natural gas, but how long until natural gas isn't going to be exempt anymore? We did the estimate. It cost about $21,000 for me to install heat pumps in my house, which I can't afford, especially with a $1,300 property tax bill increase this year. Moving over to electrics is great, I guess. But we forget that we passed the renewable energy standard this year that added $1 billion as a B billion to our electric rates. So not only is it going to be a $10 billion cost, it's also we're going to be spending more on our electricity, and who knows if we have the grid to support this. And another thing to remember is when this left the House, it left without a check back. So without the Senate doing the work that they did, and I know Senator Norris is here, the work they did to make this a study and not a bill into law really saved Vermonters about $10 billion right now, because that check back wasn't in the House version of the bill when it passed. And so where we're going to be with this, who we elect in Montpelier in November will make this decision on these costs in January.
Rebuttals. Mike.
So I thought the space program analogy was really cute. I like the laugh. Vermont doesn't need rockets, right? We could just forego that and not have a space program. But people do need to be able to afford to heat their homes. And this problem that we're trying to solve isn't all of global climate change. It's the fact that our climate is changing, and therefore these fossil fuels are going to continue to be increasingly volatile in their pricing. We have access to more efficient, still fossil fuel burning furnaces that can be part of the clean heat standard, wood, biofuels, and heat pumps. And helping people afford to get cheaper heat was the whole point of this. It's not designed to just raise costs. It's about how the state can help Vermonters transition to what is inevitably happening, which is a radical transformation of how we're going to have to use energy throughout the world, and Vermont needs to adapt to that.
Zach.
Going back to these estimates and these numbers that are being thrown out there, it just reiterates again how important honest information with full and total context is to give to your constituents so that they can make the best decision possible on how to heat their homes and more. Honest information is really important. And there's a lot of interest in making this conversation combative and scary. And the reality is that it's expanding. Things like exploring how to implement alternative energy is just increasing the freedom of choice for Vermonters to heat their homes at a cheaper rate. That's it.
Joe.
I'm certainly making no arguments against alternative energy. I am making an argument against taking an already unacceptably unaffordable environment, largely created by regulation and law made in Montpelier, vis-a-vis the things we talked about, like the property tax increase, and making it that much worse by potentially and frankly unevenly increasing people's home heating costs. On a secondary point, going back to Zach's opportunity to speak a couple turns ago, regardless of your perspective on an issue, I would disagree. I think that debates do need talking points.
I want to move to bipartisanship. And the governor is campaigning on a platform of affordability, including electing more common sense or check your record, voting record lawmakers to bring balance to Montpelier. Are the candidates here tonight committed to party-only voting, or are they willing to break ranks and vote on issues that may cross party lines? And how do the local communities figure into bipartisanship? And let's start with Joe.
A representative should represent their community, and that's what they should do, irregardless of what a general political party consensus may be. And the best idea in the room or ideas can come from any number of sources, and those are the ones that need to be espoused to the general benefit of everyone.
Mike.
So most of the things we do as legislators aren't partisan. And I 100% agree that we need to go to our communities and listen to them, and then very effectively work with other legislators to get laws passed that fund the things that we need to fund and keep us safe. I was a committee chair for the last 2 years. I had a table of 12 people, including me. 3 of those were Republicans. Most of our votes were 12-0. Some of them were 11-1. There were a few of them that were 9-3 and were straight party lines, and there were some that were 8-4. And that's doing business in Montpelier. But I sat down with a deputy secretary today for lunch and talked about, if I'm reelected, what would my committee do? What would our priorities be? And we talked about the acrimonious climate between Senate and House leadership and this governor. And Governor Scott and his secretaries and commissioners are people I've worked with on a number of issues. I've worked very closely with Commissioner Morris in the Department of Public Safety on the Public Safety Communication Task Force and fixing issues with dispatch so that more of the state has great dispatch services like, frankly, we have here thanks to the St. Albans Police Department. We can work together and do on many things, but when it comes down to some really key issues about exactly how we fund at the end of the day, there are going to be some partisan votes. And I think staying true to our values and being clear about what we are going to do when we get down there and then giving the voters a choice is really important.
Casey.
So we have to work together when we're down there, especially in the minority. We have, I'll just talk about balance for a minute. We have 37 House members out of 150 in the Republican caucus and 7 senators out of 30. And so there is a supermajority, and there is kind of a feeling that they don't have to work with us because they have the votes. But we do work together. There is a lot of times when we do work together. I have to every day because I need to get compromised on some bills. So I do work really hard in my committee to cross the aisle. I have really good working relationship with my committee chair and other members within my committee. Outside my committee, I am like I mentioned earlier, I'm the co-chair of the Vermont Future Caucus. It's actually a tripartisan group of legislators under 45, and we work together on some bills that affect younger Vermonters. And last year we worked on some criminal justice reform. We're working on, after the election, if we're reelected, we're going to talk about our issues we want to do this year. But what we really need to keep in focus is that we need to do what's right for St. Albans. And when we're down there, I remember my first term when I was down there, I was talking to someone, they're like, where are you from? I'm like, St. Albans. Like, oh, another St. Albans person. Because we do work really hard and we care about St. Albans. And they kind of are like, you guys are kind of annoying because you talk about St. Albans so much. But I think that's the pride we have in our community and the pride we have up here. And we need to focus on these issues that, we talk about housing. We need to make housing more affordable. We need to worry about the 15.5% increase in St. Albans City, the property tax. How can we work together to make these issues work for everybody? And I mean, I pride myself in the work I did during COVID to help Vermonters, thousands of Vermonters, get their paychecks that they weren't getting from the state, their unemployment checks. And the work I did with my legislative minutes that I informed everyone about what was going on and what to expect. And I get told all the time, hey, you're doing a really good job by giving us these updates. These are the kind of things that St. Albans deserves. They don't deserve us to go down there and just play party politics. We really need to focus on what's right for St. Albans and how can we make St. Albans a better place.
Zach.
I think an important element of this conversation about bipartisanship, these are relationships you have with other people that you work with, colleagues, you see differently on this, that, and the other thing. And in Vermont, the people that we elect across the state and here in Franklin County all reflect the values of the voters and what they want. And the elected officials and the numbers of them and the balance of them reflects that. Another element and another part of that is, getting back to relationships, is rhetoric. It's 2024, and we're living in one of the most heated, rhetorical times in maybe the country's political history, at least recently. And so I think that when electing a legislator, it's important to elect somebody who is going to be respectful and isn't going to deploy political rhetoric that unfairly blames and points fingers. Because at the end of the day, you need to respect each other to work together. So in electing a legislator, rhetoric is really important, how they use it, what they say about people. That's something to consider, too.
Thank you. You want to do a rebuttal and jump in? Joe.
I don't even know that it's a rebuttal, but along the side of bipartisanship, in the committee in which Mike chaired, I've had the opportunity to speak with Representatives Michael Morgan and Higley, and I know Representative Higley asked you, Mike, why in the last biennium only one Republican bill was taken up. The rest of them just never saw the light of day. And the answer was that elections have consequences. And that's fine. But to pretend that we're looking for the best ideas and only take up one Republican-sponsored bill in 2 years, I don't think that you can really reconcile those two things.
Representative Higley and I worked together on a whole number of bills, including some, especially amendments that were sponsored by Republicans that I supported in committee and helped bring to the floor. We worked on far more than one, especially when you count all of the municipal charter changes that we did on behalf of Republican representatives from communities that are represented by Republicans. You know, Montpelier isn't D.C. We get elected, we go down there, and there are some contentious issues, but most of what we're doing is working together.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this has been a particularly difficult time to be a legislator. I kid around when we're at forums sometimes because I'm the only elected Democrat from Franklin County. That, you know, I'm in the minority here and I'm in the majority there. And I think that that's benefited Franklin County. You know, down there, I'm a moderate who's not progressive or liberal enough for a lot of people in my caucus. And up here, because I'm the only Democrat, relatively, I'm sort of seen as radical and lefty. And so I like that about myself, but I know that's not for everybody.
Anyone else want to jump in? We're almost at the end of the evening here. It's 8 o'clock. I did say, so the candidates, you're great. You all are. I just want to give you, because when I put this together, I said, hey, be prepared to ask a question of your candidate, of your opponent. Do we want to do that, or do you just want to go to closing remarks? I'll give you the choice. You want to ask a question? Want to do that? Okay, so let's do that. The final question here, let's start out with Zach asking your question, and then to Casey, and then we'll move on.
It's one question.
One question.
One question.
One time for one question.
Yeah. So, Representative Toof, 70% of the voters in St. Albans Town and St. Albans City in 2022 voted in support of Proposition 5. Proposition 5 added abortion rights protections to the state constitution. And in 2019, Act 47 began that process. It began the process to enshrine reproductive freedom into our Constitution. I ask this question because I'm thinking of a friend of mine who faced an ectopic pregnancy at that time, and that put her life at risk. And now that we live in a post-Dobbs world, people who live in states that don't have those protections that Vermont does, and Vermont did the work to do, their lives are also in danger. You voted against Proposition 5. You voted against Act 47. You voted against something that the voters in your district clearly wanted and overwhelmingly wanted. And given every opportunity to protect and defend reproductive freedom in Vermont, you chose to vote against it. So my question is, could you explain your vote for us here tonight? And not just for me, not just for the audience, but thinking about specifically my friend whose life was put at risk by your votes against reproductive freedom.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. And this was something that we talked about in 2022 when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I made a mistake. I voted the wrong way that I should have in that bill. And I wrote a letter to the messenger. I believe I put it on Front Porch Forum as well. I can find that for you and send it to you. That was the wrong choice. And I will admit when I make a mistake. I will admit when I make a mistake. I don't think that we see that a lot in politics. And right now, this is something that I'm really glad I'm able to say to people that when I made that decision, I was a freshman legislator, and I made a wrong decision. And after talking with many constituents in St. Albans, talking with many people around here, I realized that I made the mistake on the vote. And so when the vote came to the people in November of 2022, I actually supported it, and I voted for it. And I was one of the 70+% of Vermonters that supported that bill. And it's really important to know that I felt bad after talking to people. I had a conversation with one of my friend's fathers who said, "Well, I was really disappointed in your vote there." And I said, "Well, you didn't reach out to me. A lot of the people that I was hearing from during that time were people that were against it." And he said, "Well, we didn't think we needed to talk to you about it." And that really opened my eyes. And I was like, wow, okay, so we need to communicate more. And I feel like it's made me a better legislator. But you're right, it was the wrong vote. And I'm glad that it passed, and I'm glad it passed with such popularity. And I look forward to, it's in the Constitution now, and I do not see a time in my lifetime when that will ever be overturned. So I appreciate it.
Casey, your turn to ask a question.
Okay. Zach, we heard, we've talked tonight about the 13.1% increase in St. Albans town and the 15.5% increase in St. Albans city in property taxes, and Fairfield's 22% increase. Would you have voted against Governor Scott's veto and supported these increases?
We talked a little bit about this earlier in the night, and how the system, as it stands right now, it's the duty of the legislature to to fit the bill for the funds that the schools requested, right? So if the question is, given the opportunity to hurt students and overturn the wills of the voters in the school district that narrowly approved the school budget, if the question is, would I have chosen to do those things, then no, I wouldn't have voted to hurt our students and overturn the will of the voters, no.
Okay, we're going to finish up with our questions here. Mike, why don't you ask a question of Joe?
So I've gotten an awful lot of postcards from your campaign, Joe. I think a lot of us in this room probably have. One of the key points of the most recent one was a list of things that I was for and you were against, but it only mentioned the funding for those things that you were against. And a key one of them, which you pointed out as a $100 million payroll tax, was Act 76, the historic child care legislation that I talked about in my opening remarks. It's opened up thousands of child care spots. It's finally turned the corner on our child care crisis and helped Vermont families affordably send their kids to care and early ed programs while those providers get paid a decent wage. It was supported by a tripartisan group of legislators, including Republicans from Franklin County, some of them. And so I'm wondering, are you really saying to the voters in St. Albans that you would work to roll back Act 76? And I just wanted to point out, too, that $100 million is a 0.11% employee payroll tax. So if you make $50,000, it's less than $5 a month that you're paying, and about $150 a year your employer would be paying. That's a bargain, and that's what most legislators thought to fix this problem. I'm wondering if you would roll it back.
Well, and you're right, it is a $100 million payroll tax. So one needs to look at how the tax was raised, and then one needs to look at what it was raised for. So we're talking about child care, and ostensibly that's to take care of child care so that folks can engage in the workforce. And I certainly don't take issue with that, and I think that should be funded in some way. I don't think a payroll tax is the right way to do it. One thing I would question is if anyone actually read the parameters of the bill that was passed. Because there are provisions whereby you can have people who have no intention of being engaged in the workforce, or arguably anything really productive at all, whereby people who are in the workforce are having that much more taken out of their paycheck. And I just don't think that's right. And I'm sorry, I don't know all the numbers of the bills. But that particular bill, as it was written, I would have been seeking amendments whereby we were supporting folks who wanted to be, frankly, active members of society, and for those who didn't, that just wanted the day off, I don't think that should come out of Vermonters' paychecks. And in neither scenario do I think that it should have been funded with the payroll tax, because it's regressive. And Mike, I know you don't have a camera on my question, but it kind of dovetails into it when it's my turn.
Okay, so Joe, you have a question now for Mike.
I do. So, Mike, an ongoing theme, and although I may disagree with it, I understand the logic, is that part of Vermont's issue is that our tax system isn't progressive enough, whereby those on the upper end of the income spectrum should pay more. So, this past year, over gubernatorial vetoes, two grossly regressive taxes, one the $100 million payroll tax, and one the 20% DMV fee increase, whereby somebody on a fixed income pays the same to register their car as a multimillionaire, were passed. How do you reconcile those two regressive taxes that were passed over gubernatorial vetoes with your vision of a more progressive tax policy?
Yeah, so across our entire tax system, we've done a number of things, especially in regard to corporate income taxes, to make them fit the modern era. And I'd be happy to give a whole seminar about tax policy. I want to talk about the rhetoric around DMV fees for a minute. Before Governor Scott was elected, the legislature used to look at a review of 1/3 of all the fees throughout all the agencies and departments every third year, so that you would essentially at least look at, does this fee cover the cost of the thing that it's funding? And during the Scott administration, and then during the pandemic, the legislature and the governor agreed not to raise DMV fees. And then we had this opportunity because of the IIRJA, the big infrastructure bill that was passed, to get a lot more bridges fixed and pavement down and roads built in Vermont. And we really have two main sources of funding for transportation. We've got DMV fees and we've got the gas tax. And I don't think anybody in this room thinks that the gas tax would be very progressive, but with DMV fees, since we had frozen them for 7 years, all we did was increase them by an inflationary amount. So Vermonters were paying $76 for a 1-year registration for a long time, and then I think it went up to $89. So it's an extra $13 a year. That, every single one of those dollars leveraged 4 or 5 federal dollars for us to build bridges and pave roads. And I think that was a good thing to do. The payroll tax is a split between, to fund childcare, it's by percent of income. So on that, it is somewhat progressive. But it's mostly on the employer, because we heard from the business community that their biggest challenge is that we have jobs, but we don't have people to fill them, and we knew a lot of parents were struggling to actively participate in the workforce. So we worked on a bill that had a very small cost for employees at 0.11%, and a little bit more cost for employers at 0.33%, and they can also write that off too. So I actually don't think it's as regressive as Joe is pointing out, and I think the things that we get for the investments that we're making are worth weighing against the funding source. Angelo Lynn, who's the brother of Emerson Lynn, who we all know really well, wrote an article, I think it was about 10 days ago, in the sister paper to the St. Albans Messenger, the Addison Independent, where he talked about how toxic this rhetoric about inflation and spending is when you're not talking about the things that it's going to fund. And I would encourage everybody to take a look at that and think about that in the context of this election, where so much of the tens of thousands of dollars that have been spent to put my name on postcards is about taxes without talking about what we're funding.
So that brings us to the end of the evening. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank our candidates. I do want to provide final remarks. Can we do it in perhaps less than 2 minutes a person? Does that sound reasonable? I know we've run over. We started a little late, but I want to be fair to the candidates and respect your time. I really respect you, everyone coming out and offering their words of wisdom tonight. So let's go ahead and start with Mike.
It's a privilege and an honor to be a state representative. I've really enjoyed my time in the Vermont House, and I have especially enjoyed the conversations that I've been having at the doors with hundreds and hundreds of people over the last couple of months as I've knocked on doors in neighborhoods throughout the city. I really appreciate my daughter Molly and my mom and my wife Stephanie for being a support. This has been a tough year to be running. I know a lot of people are frustrated. Our community is divided about school funding. Our community is divided about exactly how we deal with issues of public safety. If you want to find out more about what I think about every single issue, you can go to my website, ilikemikevt.com. I also put together a magazine that's a detailed voter guide at tinyurl.com/Mike Voter Guide that you can find online as well. But I am focused on solutions and listening and driving solutions. I hope that when folks think about this race and who to cast their vote for, they look at the experience I've had and the style of campaigning that I do when you're thinking about casting your vote, and I would really appreciate another term serving you. Thanks.
Joe.
Part of my opening comment spoke about the poor outcomes that result from supermajorities in government, and I really don't care which party they represent. They stifle the conversation, and you end up with poor results for the community. Myself and Casey is a sitting member of the legislature, have the support of Governor Scott, and we would both serve as a counterbalance whereby there can be an earnest conversation in Montpelier instead of, a certain group of people just doing whatever it is they want to do. Governor Scott was here a couple of weeks ago. He spoke to mandates, and he thought it was somewhat perverse. So you have a speaker who received 2,000 votes and a president pro tem who received 15,000 votes. The governor received a little over 200,000 votes. This is all in 2022. But the people who got 2,000 and 15,000 votes are making the call for the state of Vermont. And I don't think that's right, and I think there needs to be some compromise so that we get better outcomes.
Thank you. Casey.
First, I just want to thank you for putting this together. I want to thank the people watching at home, and I want to thank the people that came here to listen to us talk politics for 2 hours. I'm running again because I love St. Albans, and my time in the legislature, I've had proven my leadership. And I worked pretty hard for St. Albans. I was elected by my peers down there as the assistant minority leader. I'm selected as the co-chair of the Vermont Future Caucus. I am the ranking member on House Education. But nothing has given me more pride in the work that I've ever done other than being a father. So this is the biggest thing in my life that has been the most beneficial, I think, for myself and for my community. I want to go down there to fight against the 20% increase in DMV fees and increasing those. I want to fight against the $100 million payroll tax, fight against the $1 billion in new electric rates, fight against the $10 billion clean heat standard, and I want to fix this property tax increase problem that we keep having. But if I can get personal for a minute, the reason why I'm running is, and why I love this community so much, is I was involved in a car accident in 2004, and the community really came together for me and my family. The support we saw there with people just showing up at the hospital, people coming to my house, it really showed me what a community can do for a family that's struggling and going through a tough time. So I want to be able to give back to my community more and more every single day. So I thank you for electing me for the last 6 years, and I ask for another 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Zach.
Yeah, just echoing the thanks for our moderators, for the folks in the audience, and everybody watching on Northwest Access TV now and in the future. I think that the chance to serve in the legislature is an honor and a privilege. It's also a great responsibility. You owe a lot to your neighbors, and it's a lot of work. And I want to meet that responsibility with hard work. And I want to do three things. I want to unite neighbors around honest information, put the talking points and the finger pointing aside, and share the information that folks need to navigate a really, really complex world with so many issues in it. Next, I want to lower folks' costs. I think that's deeply, deeply important, especially for our middle-income folks, my family and friends who've been affected by it. I want to fight for them and my neighbors, regardless of how they vote, regardless of what their ideas are. And third, I want to have a chance to solve one of the toughest challenges that Vermont is facing, and that's housing. Just housing our neighbors, building our community, building our workforce, building our tax base. It would be a great honor to work on that and work for you. And in doing so, meet so many great neighbors, have so many good conversations with wonderful people who I didn't even know, lived in my community. They're new friends, they're new neighbors, and doing that is important. I'd just like to also add that if you want to learn more about me, again, Z4VT, that's the letter Z, the number 4, VT is in Vermont.com. Reach out to me, because I think most importantly, you deserve a legislator who is going to get back to you, who's going to respond to you, and I want to be a legislator who is a listening leader, who's ready to respond to you. Thanks so much.
Again, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience and people online. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.